My name is Scott Berman. I'm a MD, medical doctor. I also have a master's in health policy administration. I'm a vascular surgeon with Pima Heart and Vascular. I've been in practice in Tucson for going on 30 years. Clinical research is when we try and figure out if there's a new technique or a new drug that can help a patient's problem. When it's clinical research, it's involving actually patients and their care, as opposed to what's often referred to as basic science research is when we're working in the lab at the level of cells and microscopic level, or even working on models before they get to the actual human investigations. The clinical research that we're involved with at Pima Heart and Vascular involves evaluating new drugs for certain problems, or drugs that have been on the market but are being looked at for a new problem, different devices like stents that we use to open up arteries or treat aneurysms, different techniques of procedures like the aortic valve replacements that are now done through catheter instead of involving whole opening of the patient's sternum. So clinical research involves the investigation or the study of new drugs, techniques, or technologies to treat a patient's problem. And then once it gets to a level where it's been shown to potentially help, then we want to study it in patients. The first phase of that is usually what's called a phase 1 clinical trial. They don't look at long-term outcomes. They just want to know that the drug or device is doing what inventors think it's going to do, and then it's not causing harm. Then we move through a phase 2 trial, which is going to be a bigger study looking also at safety and whether or not it works. And then finally, we get to what's called a phase 3 clinical trial, which is usually multiple places studying. Usually by the time we get to a phase 3 trial, it's been determined that the drug or the technique or technology is safe and it has a good outcome in a small group of patients. So now we're going to open it up to a much larger population to see if those findings hold true in a larger group of individuals. How do patients benefit from participating in research? Well, they may get access to a treatment that the rest of the country or even the world doesn't have access to because it's not yet been approved for wide distribution. So the number one benefit that a patient gets is being available to have a new treatment for their clinical problem. The other benefit that patients get, and we hear this all the time, is some patients are just really happy to participate. Even if they personally don't experience a benefit, their participation in research may help people down the road in the future, and they derive some satisfaction about participating at that level of contribution really to humanity. One of the things that's very unique about Pima Heart and Vascular, particularly in Tucson, is that we're a private practice. Frequently, a lot of clinical research is done at academic institutions, university hospitals. A trend that we've seen over the last decade is when a company wants to determine if a drug or a new device is beneficial, they want to get that information as quickly as possible. Frequently, they've now started turning towards private practices like Pima Heart and Vascular that have a large group of physicians that are interested in pushing the envelope to learn about new technologies and techniques and can very quickly get patients into clinical trials. Because ultimately, if we are aware of something new that's going to work and doesn't have bad side effects, we want to get that out to the world as quick as possible. And in Tucson, Pima Heart and Vascular is probably one of the largest groups of cardiovascular specialists that are participating in clinical research. We don't just practice the standards, we actually help set the standards by participating in these investigative trials. So if you're a patient that's interested in finding out what clinical trials are available that you may qualify for, or if you're a physician who has patients that are interested, or you're just curious to see what clinical trials we're involved in that may fit your patients, the best resources are Pima Heart and Vascular website, where you can go into the category of clinical research. And of course, you can always call the Pima Heart and Vascular main number and ask for the clinical research department to get more information.